in your inserts, you have the daily lectionary readings. And now have the confirmation class, each student taking one day and then kind of describing it when we get together on Wednesdays. What happened on Monday? What did they talk about? So I'm going to catch you up from last week. Moses and Aaron obeys God's command. Well, God reassures Moses, of course, that his brother will speak for him, that God will tell him what to say. That's quite an assurance. God gives Moses a clue what he's going to do to Pharaoh in Egypt. Harden his heart, do signs and wonders, judgment against Egypt, a mighty hand. And then we have the first Passover. Preparing for the Passover. Just so. Instructions how to prepare the lamb. Firstborn male, unblemished, right? Blood on 2 doorposts and the lintel to make sure that when the angel comes over, they notice that you are an Israelite. Leftovers are to be burned from the lamb. There's specific instructions about that. Strike down all firstborn, people, animals, and all the gods of Egypt. I don't remember the gods, but that's in there too. All the gods of Egypt, out. Then we had the death of the firstborn. This is the, 10th? 10th plague. Midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron, told them to take their people, go and worship. Off you go. And also put in a blessing for me. And with that, the Israelites took what they had, plus they also plundered the Egyptians too. They took 600,000 men plus children. No leavened bread because they're on their journey. No time for that bread to rise. Let's go. 430 years the Israelites lived in Egypt. So that's the time remember Joseph brought his family because of the famines. He brought Jacob and his brothers back to Egypt because they had food there. So from that point on, 430 years have passed. A lot of things happened. Pillars of cloud and fire. God led the people around Philistia. They didn't want to mess with the Philistines. They didn't want the people that are already beaten up to go and fight with the Philistines. So they made their route around Philistia. That's probably why it took so long. They took the bones of Joseph because it was decreed. Pretty old bones. The Lord guided them on their journey by what? By day. Pillar of cloud. At night, pillar of fire. Crossing the Red Sea. God once again hardened Pharaoh's heart. Why? Anyway. And Pharaoh took his chariot and his army plus 600 chariots and special forces, I would say. They caught up with the people. It didn't take them long because the chariots and these soldiers were hardened and rough and they could travel pretty fast. Moses and his grid, women, elderly, children, sheep, what have you. So much, much slower. They caught up with the people. They saw the people saw the Egyptian soldiers and just almost went into despair. Moses told them that God would protect them. So he parted the Red Sea, of course, right? And a pillar of cloud guided them, and a pillar of cloud separated them from the Egyptians so they wouldn't get too freaked out about those people following them. Cloud of fire threw the Egyptian army into a panic. While they were in the midst of the Red Sea, the wheels got stuck. They got stuck in the mud and clogged their wheels. Pursuers drowned. Moses stretched out his hand against the water, down on the Egyptian army. They're goners. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great work that the Lord did against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord and believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. It pretty much catches us up to today. Now they're in the wilderness. They're wandering around. It's been a month and a half now. They've been traveling quite a bit. I have an Aesop's fable for you. A boy put his hand into a pitcher which contained a goodly quantity of figs and filberts. Now, we're not really too familiar with figs and filberts. We're getting more so now that we're getting stuff shipped from all over the world. Greedily, he clutched as many as he could, possibly in his hold. When he tried to pull it out, he couldn't do it. The narrowness of the neck prevented him from pulling it out because he had such a large quantity of stuff in his hand. Unwilling to lose any of the nuts, yet unable to draw his hand out, the lad burst into tears, bitterly bewailing his hard fortune. An honest fellow standing nearby gave him this wise and reasonable advice: grasp only half the quantity, my boy, and you will easily succeed. Take only as much manna as you need. Any more than that will spoil. Here we encounter the Israelites complaining. Seems like they complain a lot. Complaining that they're in Egypt, being slaves. They cry out to God. God pulls them out of their slavery, takes them out into the wilderness. I'm sure they were happy. At first, it was like Isaac going on his 3-day camping trip. Day 1 is really cool. Day 3 is pretty much monotonous and boring and tiring after that. People were getting tired, so they started to complain. They have a short memory. Well, God will provide. Well, he already has several different times, but you don't seem to remember that. Before this, he had gotten water out of the rock and watered the people, and they gave them plenty of water. Now, they're hungry. Well, there we have it. These people have been victims their whole lives. They know nothing else. They don't know what it's like not to be a slave. This sense of hopelessness prevailed. Learned helplessness is dangerous in a fairly prevalent society as with an oppressive government. We see it even today. Even in our own lands, we see this. In our own country, the richest country in the world, we see this learned helplessness and hopelessness. No hope for today, future. It is what it is, right? There's a quote. It is said that many poverty-stricken children have never given examples of success and learned that they will never be able to get out of the slums. Upon going to some of the projects to meet with natural parents, well, I should say natural mothers, because you could hardly ever find the fathers, of kids that were put into the DCFS, Department of Children and Family Services. You meet with mothers and you talk and hear their stories about how they grew up in the projects too, and they never had a positive male role model around. And the mother wasn't much better, as it were. The woman I met with she had 5 brothers and sisters, each from a different father. So she had a lot of half brothers and sisters. And she tried to go to school, but she could never do the homework because when you get home, she got to take care of kids. She was the oldest. So having kids of her own, obviously she neglected them as well. And then the state pulled them out of the home and put them in with foster parents. As she talked, she said that I never had anybody around. I don't know what it's like. To survive, I stole stuff so that I could provide for my brothers and sisters. I stole things to provide for my kids all the time. What's wrong with that? You just survive. You're in a world that there's no sense of I can go get a really high-paying job because there weren't any. Most on welfare because they thought, well, if I'm on welfare, it pays more than McDonald's does. Plus, if I'm McDonald's, I'll have someone watch my kids, which I'm not so sure I'm able to trust anybody around there to do that. So I stay home. I draw in welfare checks. And that's just the way life is. And I can't see, as a parent, if you're struggling to survive, which option would you take? Get a job. Well, a lot of us grew up in nicer communities. Having parents around for the most part. Strong role models, maybe a Protestant work ethic or two. If you need something badly enough, you go out and get a job and earn it. And often, more times than not, there were jobs available for you. It's tougher now. But you go and you pull yourself up, bring your bootstraps, and you make it work. And I got my whole world exploded when I met with these families. And they said, we don't know anything about that. What does it mean to pull yourself up? There are no boots to have. We hardly have shoes. We don't know what it's like. It's a little more difficult than that. They've learned what it is to be helpless and hopeless. They know what it's like to not have and to do without. Sometimes I wish our kids would do without a little bit. Learn a sense of humility and a sense of lack of entitlement for things, work for things. People weren't stupid. That's certainly not the case. As we know in some of the harder projects in Guatemala or the Indian Reservation or other places that are really hard hit. People are not stupid by any means. But it's just a sense of where they're culturally brought up. They've got to relearn things. Sometimes I think it's arrogant that we go into other countries and say, this is the way you got to do things, and they've never known. It's just like a whole different world. And they have no idea what it means to even start from step one. Sometimes it seems like our only choice is from the frying pan into the fire. Sometimes to get out of situations, it seems like it's worse to be out of the situation than to be in the situation. A woman who is in an abusive relationship, beaten regularly for anything she does, she learns there is no hope and stays in the relationship only to become more miserable or something even worse. Right? These Israelites, I'm sure, you hear them crying out, don't you? If we were back in Egypt, we might be by the flesh pots, meaning the meat stews that they had. But they weren't happy there either. They were miserable there too. At least now that God's given them an opportunity for something new, a new hope. And we often wonder, well, why would it take them 40 years to get to the promised land? Why don't you just go from day one and then a month later arrive in the promised land? What do you think their mentality would be like if that were the case? Let's see, I've got a slave mentality of helplessness and hopelessness, and I go into a culture, and I'm going to fit right back into those roles again with those people there. It'll be the same old situation, recurring day after day. It's like if you marry an alcoholic and you divorce and you marry another one, and divorce and you marry another one, it's because you've got some kind of issues that you've got to work through. You've learned some things that you have to unlearn. So the Israelite people had to unlearn a lot of things before they went into this promised land. They had to learn what it means to be people of God, to be strong, to be confident, to trust, and what that means. 40 years is a long time. And then we look at that, and we say, well, that was terrible for them, but yet we know that it exists today. Things haven't changed much in some ways. We know the history of the Bible. We read the stories in the Bible, stories upon stories of God providing, of people saying, well, I guess I can trust God, and then soon forget. We know what that's like. We see it everywhere in the Bible. We see it in our own lives. Well, let's have faith in this, and then shortly after that, hey, let's have faith the Vikings will go to the Super Bowl and this be disappointed once again. Of course, you read my article, didn't you? It is what it is. Sometimes I wonder if that's just a sense of helplessness too. It is what it is. Can't change it. Don't even try. Wow, is that the start of it? Or is that sense of reality that we just have to, or do we make our own reality? Did the Israelites make their own reality? Does God help them to make a new reality, a new possibility? Learn helplessness and how cultures can crush you sometimes. I don't know if you've read the book Tuesdays with Morrie. Mitch Albom wrote this book 10, 15 years ago. Morrie was a man who had Lou Gehrig's disease and was slowly wasting away. And this young man who happened to be one of his students, because Morrie was a professor at a university, and he spent a lot of time with Morrie interviewing him about life and his life. And Morrie took life and grasped it with both hands and enjoyed life and sought the best out of life. He said to Mitch, society will crush you. It will beat you up and tell you that you are no good. Don't believe any of it. Don't believe what culture tells you that you're bad or awful or worthless. It's just not so. God is trying to make this happen with his Israelite people. God is trying to make it happen with us today. A shining light in the wilderness, cloud by day, a firing cloud at night, guiding the people of Israel. The promise of the Exodus, deliverance, a journey of faith, a faith in which dips and highs and lows, and that's just the way our life is. And God understands that. It's hard to trust God's future. It's hard to let go of control, let God do some work in our lives. It's hard to not be able to to put all our pieces in place or go out on a ledge and say, I'm not sure what the next step is, but I'm going to trust that things will work out. Plan what we can and trust God, right? We learn that God is in control. God does love God's people. For us, the modern-day Israelites in the desert and on our journeys in life, we seek our ways. God is present to us in those things. We'll always remain deeply sinners, but God has gotten past that and gotten through that and keeps making promises and keeps offering faith to us that God will provide, and God does provide. All you confirmation kids, you getting all this? Yeah? Taking notes, I'm sure? All right. And so our story continues. God's story continues. Amen.